The surveyor measured the land and exposed a 1,200-foot lie. I inherited 3,000 acres and walked straight into an HOA Thanksgiving party built on my land. They told me I was trespassing, waved fake documents in my face, and called the sheriff to force me out. But the truth was buried in my uncle's cabin, and once I found it, everything the HOA built came crashing down. Stick with me because this one ends in court, and the canyon itself remembers what justice sounds like. If you've ever stood your ground for what's yours, hit subscribe. There are more ranch, land, and HOA battles coming, and you won't want to miss the next one. Jake Carter had driven 12 hours across 2 states, expecting nothing more than a quiet Thanksgiving on land he barely remembered. His uncle's will had dropped into his life like a stone. 3,000 acres of Montana canyon, timber, and lake shoreline suddenly bearing his name. As a former dam engineer, Jake knew land. He knew water lines and easements and the way dirt held its history like scars. But he didn't know his uncle's land. Not really. Not yet. He expected a sagging wooden fence, maybe a rusted padlock, maybe a mailbox half swallowed by weeds. What he did not expect was a freshly paved road lined with decorative lanterns and a stone entrance gate taller than his truck. A black metal arch stretched across the top, polished enough to throw back the afternoon sun. Timber Ridge HOA, Thanksgiving celebration. The banner hung beneath the arch in red and gold letters. Music leaked through the gate. Cars, new, expensive, spotless, filled a parking lot that absolutely should not have existed on Carter land. Jake eased his pickup to a stop, staring at the scene through the windshield. For a long moment he wondered if his GPS had malfunctioned, if he'd mixed up an address, if the old deed sitting in the passenger seat was somehow wrong. But no, this was the location Frank Hollister, his uncle's attorney, had sent him. The only road into the northern portion of the inheritance. The road that should have led to an old ranch gate and a dirt path. Instead, he saw families in sweaters carrying pie tins. He saw children dragging pumpkin-shaped balloons. He smelled turkey drifting through the cold wind. It looked like a suburban block party had been airdropped onto wilderness. Jake stepped out of the truck. The cold bit instantly, but he barely felt it. A man in a yellow vest, security, or at least someone playing the role, came toward him with the stiff posture of someone who'd been told their job was, "Stop anyone who looks out of place." "You a resident?" the guard asked. Jake shook his head slowly. "No, I'm the property owner." The guard blinked, twice, then frowned. "This land belongs to Timber Ridge Estates, residents only for today's event." Jake's jaw flexed. "It belonged to my uncle for 40 years. And as of last month, it belongs to me." The guard gave him the kind of smile people save for drivers who swear they had a green light. He tapped a radio clipped to his vest. "Copy. I've got someone claiming owner status. Name?" "Jake Carter." A pause. A crackle of static. A quiet conversation the guard tried and failed to hide. His expression shifted from confusion to unease. "Sir," he said carefully, "I'm going to need you to wait right here." Jake folded his arms, letting his eyes sweep the grounds. The pavilion near the lake, brand new. The dock, fresh lumber. The road, too smooth to be older than a few years. None of this should have existed. If construction this large had happened on Carter land, his uncle would have had to approve it, or fight it, or at least mention it in one of the 2-word postcards he occasionally sent. But Harold Carter hadn't been the mention type. Not in life. Not in death. 10 minutes passed. Families streamed in through a side gate, laughing, arguing, living their lives as though they weren't walking over someone else's land. Not one of them spared Jake a glance. Then she appeared. Mid-50s, sharp blonde hair pulled into a bun tight enough to sting, white blouse beneath a tailored coat. The posture of someone used to lecturing HOA boards into submission. She walked like she owned the asphalt. "I'm Bethany Crowell," she announced before she even reached him, "president of the Timber Ridge Homeowners Association. You're trespassing." Jake stared at her. "On my property?" She folded her arms. "On community property. This entire recreation zone is under HOA jurisdiction. Your presence here is unauthorized. Jake felt the first crack of anger split through the confusion. My uncle never sold this land. Bethany smiled, the kind of smile polished over years of getting her way. She pulled out her phone, tapped twice and held up the screen. A document appeared, an official-looking survey amendment stamped 2016. At the bottom was a signature that looked like his uncle's, if someone squinted. He granted us permanent easement rights, she said. Your uncle was very supportive of the community. Jake's eyes drifted past the glowing screen. Just beyond her, half buried in a patch of trampled grass, lay a metal post, rusted, bent, orange paint still clinging to the surface. A property boundary marker. The kind old survey crews pounded into the ground in the 70s and 80s. It wasn't in the ground anymore. Someone had ripped it out. Bethany followed his gaze. Her smile softened into something colder, harder. Whatever you believe you inherited, she said quietly. It doesn't include this. The documents are clear. You have no standing here. Jake breathed once, slow and controlled. If that's true, he said, you won't mind calling the sheriff. Her eyebrows lifted, surprised he'd push back, but she didn't hesitate. Gladly. She turned, giving the guard a sharp gesture. He made the call. Jake stood in the cold wind, watching the families, the banner, the lake beyond the pavilion. None of this belonged to Timber Ridge. None of this should have existed. But here it was, built, claimed, defended, and he was the outsider on land tied to his bloodline. He tightened his jaw. Something wasn't right here. Not even close. Bethany stayed near the gate while the guard radioed for the sheriff, but she didn't look worried. She looked mildly inconvenienced, like Jake was a pothole someone forgot to patch. She clasped her hands in front of her, nails perfectly manicured. Chin lifted slightly, as if she was already preparing whatever polished performance she'd give the deputy when he arrived. Jake kept his eyes on the steel post half hidden in the grass. That post mattered. It wasn't just old metal. It was a line drawn by the U.S. government decades ago. A line that said this was Carter land. A line that someone had physically torn out, moved, and paved over. He stepped toward it. Bethany's voice snapped through the air. Do not touch community property. Jake looked back at her slowly. This was a boundary marker. It was junk, she said. Leftover debris from before our development. We cleaned the area responsibly. That smile again. Smooth, confident, sharpened by entitlement. Please stay where you are. Sheriff Morales won't appreciate you tampering with evidence. Evidence of what? Jake asked. Your trespass? Jake almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he straightened and crossed his arms. My uncle never signed away this land. Bethany tapped her phone again, flicking to the survey amendment she'd shown earlier. His signature is right here. She held the screen as though it were scripture. Dated June 14, 2016. He granted the HOA a permanent easement of the lakeshore and adjoining recreational structures. This entire section belongs to Timber Ridge now. Jake didn't take the phone. He couldn't even walk to the mailbox in 2016. Her smile thinned. People sign legal documents from home all the time. He stepped closer. Show me the physical copy. She slid the phone into her coat like returning a weapon to its holster. The original is stored with the county recorder's office. You're welcome to submit a request Monday morning. Her tone dipped, voice lower, cooler. But in the meantime, you're on HOA land and you're disrupting our holiday event. Jake felt anger finally pierce through the confusion. Your HOA exists on stolen property. Her eyes flickered. Not panic, not guilt, but annoyance. Like the word stolen offended her sensibilities. Mr. Carter, I understand inheriting land may be overwhelming, but the community has been established here for years. Your uncle was fully aware and supportive. He never said a word. He didn't need to. The guard approached again. Sheriff's 5 minutes out. Bethany nodded. Good. Maybe he can help you understand the difference between ownership claims and reality. She gestured toward the lake, where families were lining up for food at the pavilion. 312 households rely on this property for recreation and events. We've invested millions in infrastructure. None of this can be undone because one man shows up with a story. Jake looked at her, really looked, and he realized something. She believed every word coming out of her mouth. This wasn't improvisation. This wasn't panic. This was a script she'd rehearsed for years. "How long has your HOA been using this land?" he asked. She tilted her head, calculating. "We began improvements in 2016, completed them in 2019. The easement agreement was the foundation of the project." Jake nodded slowly. "So everything built here relies on that one signature." "It's not the only supporting document," she said quickly. "There are filings, surveys, board approvals, but none matter if the signature is fake." Her smile vanished entirely. For the first time, she stepped closer, voice dropping to something colder than the Montana wind. "Listen carefully, Jake Carter. Your uncle signed the amendment. The HOA has documentation and legal precedent, and this community will defend what it has built. If you want to challenge the paperwork, do it through proper channels." Her eyes narrowed, the politeness fully stripped away. "But you will not disrupt our event. You will not yell at my staff. And you will not enter the property again without permission." "I haven't yelled," Jake said, steady. "And I haven't stepped through your gate." Her jaw flexed. "Good. Let's keep it that way." Voices carried from the parking lot. Kids laughing. Someone shouting that pies were ready. Music played over speakers. Banjo, light and upbeat, absurdly mismatched to the tension building at the gate. Jake took in the entire scene again. The pavilion, the dock, the decorative lights, the fresh asphalt. All of it sat where untouched wilderness should have been. His uncle must have known. And he must have been too sick, too isolated, too tired to fight. Jake's chest tightened. The guard stiffened suddenly. "Sheriff's here." A white SUV rolled up, tires crunching over gravel. Sheriff Jake Morales stepped out, late 50s, weathered face, slow steady movements that said he'd handled enough disputes to know when things were headed downhill. He greeted Bethany first, of course. She shook his hand like they shared a professional friendship. Maybe they did. Then the sheriff turned to Jake. "I'm told we have a trespassing issue." Jake held his ground. "No, you have a boundary dispute." Bethany jumped in. "Sheriff, Mr. Carter arrived unannounced, refused to identify himself as a non-resident, and attempted to enter community property during a private event." Jake kept his eyes on the sheriff. "My uncle owned this land. I inherited it last month. I have the deed. The HOA built on land that was never theirs." Morales exhaled, long and tired. "Do you have the deed with you?" Jake clenched his jaw. "Not the certified copy. It's in Denver. But I have an email with the parcel description." Bethany pounced. "Sheriff, he has nothing legally valid to show. The HOA has recorded easement rights dating back nearly a decade." Morales raised a hand, silencing them both. "This is Thanksgiving. I'm not adjudicating land titles at a lakefront gate." He turned to Jake. "Based on what I see, this is a civil disagreement. No criminal activity." Then to Bethany. "Unless he forces his way in, you have no grounds to press trespass charges. He's standing on a public road." Bethany's face tightened, held still, but clearly straining. Morales gave Jake a sympathetic nod. "Get your paperwork. Talk to a lawyer. Start there." The sheriff walked back to his SUV, already done with the matter. Bethany waited until he was out of earshot. Her voice dropped to an icy whisper. "You can push this if you want," she said. "But understand something, Mr. Carter. This community has lawyers, funding, and 12 years of precedent. And you," she looked him over clinically, "have a story and no documents." Jake didn't respond. He didn't need to. He simply stared at the ripped-out boundary post behind her, a piece of the land that refused to lie. Bethany stepped back through the gate. "Enjoy your holiday somewhere else." The guard closed the iron bars between them. Jake stood alone on the road, wind cutting through his jacket, eyes fixed on the lake he was no longer allowed to touch. Something wasn't right here. And whatever it was, they'd just made the mistake of daring him to prove it. Jake remained on that cold stretch of county road, long after the iron gate clattered shut. The smell of roasted turkey drifted across the wind like an insult. Families laughed inside the pavilion. Music thumped across water that should have been his family's private shoreline. None of it fit. None of it made sense. The land had been carved, claimed, and occupied by people who acted as if his uncle never existed. Jake returned to his truck, slid behind the wheel, and gripped it until his knuckles paled. Sheriff Morales' SUV hadn't fully disappeared down the road before the next decision hit him with clarity. He needed proof. Real proof. Not assumptions. Not memories of Harold's stubborn independence. Something the law couldn't ignore. The first step was obvious. Go straight to the farmhouse. It sat 2 miles north, accessible from a separate dirt road that wound through open pasture. Jake drove quickly, adrenaline feeding every breath. When the cabin finally appeared at the crest of a ridge, he felt a punch of relief. This was the place he remembered. Weathered siding, a sagging porch, the scent of pine clinging to the air. The last untouched piece of Carter land. He stepped inside and scanned the silent room. Dust coated every surface, but nothing felt disturbed. No footprints that weren't his. No intrusion by the HOA. That alone was a small victory. Jake moved through the cabin methodically. Harold had never been sentimental, but he'd been meticulous about paperwork. Bills, receipts, notes. He kept everything. Jake opened drawers, cabinets, trunks. Most held ordinary junk. But a small desk in the back bedroom caught his eye. The middle drawer stuck at first, as if it hadn't been opened in years. Jake tugged harder, and it slid free with a groan. Inside sat an envelope yellowed at the edges, labeled simply, "Property." Jake's pulse quickened. He pulled it open carefully. A stack of documents spilled into his hands. The original 1980s deed for the full 3,000 acres, parcel maps showing boundary lines in thick red ink, utility right-of-way paperwork, 30-year tax records. The ink on every signature was identical, every payment consistent, every map matched the coordinates burned into his memory from the email Frank had sent. But one item inside the envelope wasn't like the others. A handwritten note, unsteady, but unmistakably Harold's. "They moved the fences. I kept everything. Don't let them take what's yours." Jake sat back on the bed, the page trembling slightly in his hands. It wasn't emotion shaking him. It was fury, quiet, controlled, unforgiving. Harold had known something was wrong. He'd seen the HOA expansion. He'd heard their machinery. He'd watched them push deeper across his boundaries. And he'd been too sick to stop them. Jake folded the letter. The stakes were clearer now. He wasn't just protecting his inheritance. He was finishing the fight his uncle couldn't. He called Frank Hollister immediately. The attorney answered on the second ring, voice steady and familiar. "Jake, thought you'd be visiting the property today. How's it look?" "Wrong," Jake said. "There's an HOA gate across the south entrance. A pavilion, a dock, a parking lot. They say my uncle signed an easement in 2016. Frank went silent for a moment. Harold never signed anything of the sort. "They had a document," Jake continued. "A survey amendment. Signature looked close to Harold's, but not right." Frank's tone sharpened. "Find every document he left behind. Take photos. I'll need copies. And Jake, don't confront them again tonight. You need legal footing first." "I've got the original deed," Jake said. "Maps, tax receipts, and a letter from Harold." He knew they moved boundaries. "That's enough to start," Frank said. "But let me be clear. This will escalate quickly. HOAs with money don't back down unless forced." Jake looked out the window toward the distant lake. The pavilion lights glowed like a taunt. "Then we'll force them." After ending the call, Jake scanned the cabin again. There had to be more. Harold had said he kept everything. Jake found a metal lockbox beneath the bed. Inside were receipts, old surveys, correspondence with the county assessor. Every record meticulously preserved. That was Harold. A quiet man who never demanded anything but documented everything. Jake photographed every page. Then a new thought struck him. He needed the sheriff to see the documents. Not to side with him, but to understand that this wasn't a Thanksgiving disturbance. This was a land dispute built on forged paperwork and hidden boundaries. Sheriff Morales was parked outside the cabin when Jake stepped out. The older man leaned against his SUV, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Figured you'd come up here, he said. Wanted to make sure things were calm. Jake handed him the deed. Morales studied it under the porch light. This is legitimate, he muttered. Recorded in '83, boundaries match what I've seen on old county maps. Jake held out Harold's note next. He knew they moved the fences. Morales didn't read the whole thing, but his brow furrowed. This isn't what they presented at the gate. No, Jake said. They showed a digital copy of a 2016 survey. Nothing else. No supporting documents. The sheriff nodded slowly. Digital files are easy to produce. County records aren't. He handed the papers back. Look, Carter. I'm not your lawyer. But if what you're saying is true, this isn't just civil. If a signature was forged, that's felony territory. Jake's jaw tightened. They've taken the lake, the trail, the canyon ridge, everything. And they'll fight to keep it, Morales said. They've got money, attorneys on retainer, political friends. You're up against a machine that doesn't believe it can lose. I'm not alone, Jake said quietly. The sheriff studied him a long moment. Good, because you're going to need help. He pushed away from the SUV. But for tonight, stay out of their gate. Monday, go to the recorder's office. Get certified copies of everything. He opened the driver door, paused, and added, And Carter, if they built on your land without a valid easement, they're in deeper trouble than they're pretending. Morales drove off into the night. Jake stood beneath the cabin's porch light, holding the deed, the maps, the letter. The wind carried faint traces of music from the HOA's party. Each note felt like a nail driven deeper into stolen ground. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a clerical error. Someone had taken his family's land, piece by piece, quietly, deliberately. And the sheriff had just confirmed one thing. Jake wasn't imagining the threat. It was real. And by Monday morning, he intended to expose every inch of it. Sunday passed like a taut wire. No movement from the HOA, no calls from sheriff's deputies, no sudden appearance of angry residents demanding he leave their community property. The silence wasn't comforting. It felt strategic, like Timber Ridge was waiting for him to make the wrong move. Jake spent the night cataloging every document he'd found in the cabin. Deed scans, tax receipts, parcel maps, Harold's note. He assembled everything into a single folder on his laptop and backed it up twice. His engineer instincts returned in full. Redundancy, accuracy, time-stamped files. He wasn't just preparing for a dispute. He was preparing for war. When the county recorder's office opened Monday at 9 a.m., Jake was already in the parking lot. The building was small, barely 4 offices and a clerk's counter, but it held the power to unravel everything the HOA claimed. He stepped inside, folder under his arm, and approached the woman behind the counter. Morning, she said, without looking up from her keyboard. Property research? Yes, Jake answered. Parcel 18147C, Carter Land. I need certified copies of all deeds, surveys, and easement filings. The clerk typed, paused, then frowned. This parcel has a lot of documents. She scrolled deeper, eyebrows pulling together. Original deed, tax rolls, several maps, and, Jake's stomach tightened. What? There's a revision survey filed in 2016. Boundary shift. Reduces the acreage by 219 acres on the southern edge. She clicked through more screens. But I don't see the accompanying easement agreement. Jake leaned forward. What do you mean? A boundary change of this size, she said, tapping her nails on the desk, must be recorded with supporting documentation. There's nothing here except the survey itself. No deed transfer. No easement contract, no recorded meeting minutes, no notarized approval. Jake felt heat flare in his chest. Not anger yet, but something close. Can I get copies of everything? The clerk hesitated. Are you the owner? Jake slid the inheritance letter across the counter. She scanned it, nodded, and began printing. A stack of papers grew quickly. Maps with boundaries marked in red, the clean 1980s deed with Harold's bold signature, tax assessment sheets showing he'd paid on the full acreage every single year. Finally, she handed him the 2016 survey. Jake studied it. It looked official. Stamps, seal, surveyor markings. But the signature at the bottom pulled him up short. It resembled Harold's handwriting, but the slant was off. The pressure too even. The lines too controlled. Like someone had traced it with robotic patience. And then Jake saw something else. The surveying company listed at the bottom was Clearmark Land Services, LLC. "Where is this company located?" he asked. The clerk typed quickly, then raised an eyebrow. "Dissolved. Closed in 2018. No forwarding address. No successor entity." Jake's pulse thudded. Who was the surveyor of record? She printed one last sheet. A single name sat beneath the company header. Marcus Hale. Jake didn't know the name yet. But he would. He walked out with a folder thick enough to choke a file cabinet. The cold air sharpened his thoughts. This wasn't just sloppy paperwork. This was engineered misdirection. Someone had produced a survey that shifted land boundaries without ever legally transferring rights. And the county accepted it because no one challenged it. Until now. He called the one person who could spot cracks faster than he could. "Sarah, it's Jake. I have everything." She didn't ask for details. "Bring it to Lakeside. Now." He reached her office 30 minutes later. A converted mechanic's shop, the place smelled faintly of old oil and printer toner. Sarah Whitfield was a land rights lawyer who specialized in telling bureaucracies they were wrong and making the courts agree. Early 40s, sharp eyes, sharper mind. She spread the documents across her desk. "Start talking." Jake explained the HOA gate, the pavilion, the lake, the alleged easement, everything. She barely reacted as she read, flipping pages like a forensic surgeon examining an autopsy. Finally, she lifted the 2016 survey. "Here's your first problem." She tapped the signature. "This isn't natural handwriting. See the slow curves? Hesitation marks? Pressure consistency? I'd bet a specialist would call this tracing." Jake felt vindication flicker. "Bethany showed me a photo of this at the gate." Sarah's eyes locked onto his. "Digital image?" "Yes. That makes it even easier to manipulate." She leaned back. "But we don't accuse forgery until we're certain. Give me a few days to bring in an examiner. Meanwhile, you need a neutral surveyor to confirm the boundary shift." "Already thought of that," Jake said. "Know anyone good?" Sarah smirked. "Best in the county. Name's Remy Hale. No relation to Marcus. Lives off the grid half the year. Doesn't trust HOAs, governments, or digital clocks. But he's honest." Jake nodded. "I'll call him." Sarah sorted the files into 2 stacks. Clean records and suspicious records. The latter grew quickly. "Jake," she said quietly, "if what you're telling me is accurate, the HOA didn't just overstep. They may have taken lakefront land without a legal right. And if a forged document was used to justify construction, that's felony-level fraud." Jake let out a slow breath. "So this isn't a misunderstanding?" "No," she said. "This is theft wrapped in paperwork." Sarah boxed the documents and handed him a second copy. "Keep these with you. Triple back up everything. From the moment you stepped onto that road, you became a threat to someone who thinks they own what you inherited." Jake nodded. "I intend to prove otherwise." Before he left, Sarah added one more warning. "Expect retaliation. HOAs like Timber Ridge don't roll over. They posture first, they threaten next, then they escalate." Jake thought of Bethany's smile, her certainty, her whispered warning about lawyers and precedent. "They've already started," he said. As he drove away, the lake glinted through gaps in the tree line, a stolen jewel someone else was polishing. But Harold had kept the truth, and Jake was done being polite. By the time the sun set behind the mountains, Jake had made his final call of the day, to the surveyor. A gruff voice answered on the 3rd ring. "This is Remy." "Remy Hale?" Jake asked. "That's what the phone says." "My name's Jake Carter. I need a boundary survey. Fast and discreet." Remy grunted. "Someone giving you trouble?" "An HOA," Jake said. A beat of silence, then a low, satisfied chuckle. "Son, you just hired the right man." And with that, the fight for the land truly began. Remy Hale arrived at dawn the next morning, driving a dented forestry green pickup that looked like it had survived 3 decades of bad terrain and worse decisions. The man who stepped out wore a wool jacket patched at both elbows, boots caked in old mud, and an expression that said he had absolutely no interest in anyone's drama, except when it involved land boundaries. Then he lived for it. "You Carter?" he asked, not bothering with a handshake. "Jake," he confirmed. "Good. Show me where the trouble starts." They hiked the southern ridge first, where the original Carter property markers should have stood. Remy worked in efficient silence, reading the land like scripture. He planted his survey tripod, checked angles, calculated elevations, measured distances with tape and laser. The man didn't guess. He verified. He didn't trust app data. He trusted his own eyes. 2 hours in, Remy grunted as he crouched beside a stump of metal half buried in dirt. "This is one of your original markers," he said. "Stamped 1983. County issued. Legally definitive." Jake nodded. "There should have been another about 80 yards east." Remy stood, repositioned, and began sweeping the brush with his boot. 5 minutes later, he kicked something solid. Another marker. Bent, yanked, tossed aside. Remy whistled low. Someone wanted this gone. Not weather damage. Not accidental impact. Deliberate. The surveyor's voice hardened. "That's evidence of boundary tampering." Jake felt confirmation surge like heat under his skin. "Keep going." They trekked farther, cutting across timberlands until the HOA's improvements peeked through the trees. Bright pavilion roof, glinting railings, crushed granite path deliberately curated for happy suburban feet. Remy eyed the development with disdain. "Looks expensive." "It was built illegally," Jake said. "We'll see." By mid-afternoon, Remy had mapped enough points to begin connecting the historical boundary to the modern misplacement. He dropped his gear onto the hood of his truck, scribbling lines across a topographic map. "It's not even subtle," he said. "The HOA's 2016 survey shifted your southern boundary north by exactly 1,200 feet. Clean line, precision cut. They took your lakefront, your trail, and a chunk of your canyon ridge." Jake stared at the map. "How clear is this?" Remy met his eyes. "Clear enough for a judge to see it in 5 seconds." Jake exhaled slowly. The stakes snapped into focus. The HOA hadn't stumbled onto his land. They'd carved off the most valuable piece and repurposed it into a private resort. A theft packaged in paperwork and hidden behind a smiling HOA president. Then the first shot of retaliation arrived. Jake's phone buzzed. An email notification. Subject: Notice of violation. Timber Ridge HOA. Amount due: $3,800. Description: harassment of community staff and interference with holiday event. Jake blinked once. "They're fining me." Remy barked a laugh. "You're not even in their HOA." "I know," Jake muttered. "They don't." The email ended with a threat. Failure to pay within 10 days will result in legal action and property lien. Remy leaned over his shoulder. "That's garbage. HOA jurisdiction stops at their boundary, which," he jabbed the map, "sure as hell is not where they think it is." "Sarah's going to want a copy of this," Jake said. "Oh, she'll more than want it," Remy replied. "She'll salivate." They returned to the cabin, where Jake photographed every measurement, every map, every displaced marker. As he uploaded the data to the shared case folder, he noticed movement outside the cabin window, a dark SUV rolling slowly down the access road. Not the sheriff. Not a resident's minivan. Black. Tinted windows. No plates. Jake stepped onto the porch as it stopped 50 yards away. The passenger window lowered half an inch, just enough for a voice to carry. "Mr. Carter," a man called calmly. "Timber Ridge HOA would like a word." Jake's spine stiffened. "Who are you?" "Legal liaison," the man replied. "We're aware you hired a surveyor. That action is considered antagonistic. The board requests you cease all interference and schedule a meeting to resolve your misunderstanding." Behind Jake, Remy muttered, "They're quicker than termites." Jake took a step forward. "I'm gathering evidence, Not interfering. The voice sharpened. If you pursue this, Mr. Carter, you will face consequences. Litigation, legal fees, public complaints. Our board does not tolerate slander or disruption. Jake kept his tone even. Your HOA built on my land. That remains to be proven, the man said. And until then, you should understand. Timber Ridge Estates is a community with resources. People talk, reputations shift, careers suffer. I'd recommend cooperation. Jake's jaw tightened. Get off my property. The window slid up. The SUV turned around and rolled away, slow and patient, like it wanted him to know it would be back. Remy spit into the dirt. They sent intimidation. They're scared. Jake nodded. Good. He returned inside and forwarded the violation email, the map data, and a detailed report to Sarah. She responded within seconds. We now have motive, method, and evidence of harassment. I'll prepare filings. Do not engage them directly. They're baiting you. Jake set the phone down. The air felt different now, electrified, volatile. The HOA had drawn a line, a false one, a stolen one, and Jake had just exposed the first crack in their facade. Remy packed his gear. Give me 48 hours, he said. I'll get you a finalized boundary report with professional certification. After that, you'll have the ammo to bury them in paperwork. Jake shook his hand. This time Remy offered it willingly. As the surveyor drove off, the sun dipped behind the mountains. The lake reflected the last burn of orange light. A lake Jake's uncle had fished in for decades. A lake now surrounded by structures built on fraud. Jake watched the fading shoreline with one promise solidifying inside him. They were done taking from the Carters, because now he had proof, and soon the entire county would see it. Jake checked into the tiny room above the hardware store that same evening, a space barely big enough for a mattress, a table, and a window facing Main Street. It wasn't home. It wasn't even comfortable, but it put him 15 minutes from every office that mattered. The county recorder, the assessor, the courthouse, and Sarah's small law firm. It was close enough to fight. By sunrise, he was already at the table, sorting piles of papers gathered from Harold's cabin. 37 years of tax receipts, old survey maps, letters from the Bureau of Land Management, and the deed typed on brittle paper from the early 80s. Sarah arrived at 8 sharp, coffee in hand, hair pulled back, eyes focused. Let's start, she said. No small talk, no sympathy, pure strategy. Jake pushed the first stack toward her. Everything Harold kept. He knew something was wrong. Sarah skimmed the documents, her movements fast but precise. These tax assessments matter. The county has been billing and collecting on all 3,000 acres consistently. If Harold had transferred even a portion, the taxable acreage would have changed. It didn't. So the HOA survey never synced with the county, Jake said. We can use that. She spread the maps across the table, cross-checking boundary descriptions line by line. When she reached the letter Harold had written, the shaky note warning him not to let them take the land, her expression softened for half a second, then hardened again. They took advantage of a sick old man, she said quietly. That's motive. Jake nodded, and Remy confirmed the boundary shift. Yes, which gives us method. And then she pulled out her tablet and opened the HOA's public filings, their bylaws, minutes from past meetings, fines, flashy newsletters sent to residents. All we need now is intent, something that shows they knew this was wrong. Jake leaned back. We'll find it. But the HOA wasn't waiting. That afternoon, a storm of digital hostility began. Jake received 4 emails from different HOA board members accusing him of land theft, community sabotage, and false claims intended to destabilize Timber Ridge. Social media accounts posted his name, photo, and hometown. A local community forum thread labeled him an outsider trying to destroy property values. You see this? Jake held up his phone. Sarah studied the posts. It's coordinated. They're trying to isolate you. Classic play, public pressure to force you to walk away. Does it work? Only on people who don't have evidence. Jake set his jaw. Not me. The next morning, they visited the county treasurer's office. The clerk, a tired-looking man who'd seen every type of paperwork disaster, took one look at Sarah's card and immediately pulled up the files. All taxes paid by a Harold Carter, he said. Full acreage, never altered, no split parcels, no transferred lots, nothing unusual. Can you print everything? Sarah asked. He printed 2 boxes worth. Back in the apartment, Jake helped her organize the evidence, setting each category into folders: deed, tax, survey, structures, harassment. By evening, the small room looked like a miniature war room. Papers on the table, maps pinned to the wall, timelines forming in marker. We're getting close, no, Sarah said. But we still need their internal communications. Something to show this wasn't an administrative error. Jake nodded. Bethany's too polished. She wouldn't leave a mess in official records. She wouldn't, Sarah agreed. But HOAs aren't one person. Someone always cracks. The silence of the room thickened. Jake felt it. Pressure, expectation, the weight of a fight building behind cold paperwork and quiet nights. Outside, a truck drove slowly down Main Street and paused under his window. Its engine idled for 10 long seconds before rolling away. Jake watched the taillights disappear, unease crawling up his spine. They're watching, he said. They're scared, Sarah corrected. Still, the harassment campaign grew. Residents he'd never met wrote angry comments online. Someone emailed him a screenshot of a vote. Timber Ridge HOA was seeking permission to pursue legal action against him for slander and obstruction of community growth. Sarah read it and set the phone down. This is panic. They know evidence is stacking against them. Jake stared out the window again. The town was quiet. December cold had emptied the streets, but something in the stillness felt tense, like the moment before the first crack of thunder. Keep going, she said. So he did. The next week was a blur of documentation. Jake visited the county assessor to gather every zoning record tied to the property. He filed a request with the Department of Environmental Quality to determine whether Timber Ridge had permits for its lakeside structures. He sifted through newspaper archives looking for mention of any public notices filed by the HOA. There were none. No environmental impact studies. No permit postings. No public disclosures. They built everything in the dark, Sarah said. Good. Darkness is easy to expose in court. By Friday, the weight of everything they'd uncovered filled the room. Jake stared at the evidence board, tracing lines between documents, dates, signatures, mismatched acreage counts. He felt something shift inside him, a deeper certainty, a calm that didn't dull the anger, but sharpened it. They're not getting away with this, he said softly. A knock jolted them both. Jake crossed to the door and opened it. No one was there. Just an envelope on the ground. He picked it up, opened it carefully, and stared at the contents. A printed notice from Timber Ridge HOA. Cease your defamatory investigation immediately. Any further attempts to dispute HOA boundaries will result in legal action, public reporting, and possible criminal referrals. Sarah snorted. They're threatening to report you for investigating your own land? Jake folded the letter. This is fear talking. No, she corrected. This is desperation. The night turned quiet again. Jake sat at the small table, surrounded by documents, lit only by a desk lamp, and felt the shift, the moment where the fight stopped being theoretical. Now it was personal. Now the HOA had shown its hand. But the last page he lifted that night changed everything. A spreadsheet buried deep in the assessor's database. A permit application tied to Timber Ridge HOA. A signature. Marcus Hale, developer. Sarah looked at it, her eyes narrowing. This isn't just Bethany. Developers don't join land disputes unless there's money involved. Jake nodded slowly. Then this isn't an HOA problem. It's a land grab, she said. A coordinated one. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. Jake finally spoke. So what do we do? Sarah leaned forward. We wait. For what? For the mistake they're guaranteed to make. And sure enough, that mistake came sooner than either of them expected. Late Sunday night, Jake's phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. I have information. We need to talk. Tomorrow, alone. Jake showed it to Sarah. Who is it? She asked. He didn't know. But he did know one thing. The storm had broken. And someone inside Timber Ridge was finally ready to talk. Jake arrived early at the meeting spot, a shuttered diner 10 miles east of Lakeside, chosen specifically because no one from Timber Ridge would wander in by accident. The parking lot was empty, except for a single maroon sedan idling near the far corner. Its driver didn't move until Jake stepped out of his truck. A man in his late 50s emerged. Thin, graying hair, posture that carried decades of quiet resentment. His eyes scanned the road before he approached. "You Jake Carter?" he asked. "Yes." The man extended a trembling hand. "Name's Tom Bennett, former HOA treasurer. And before you say anything, no, I'm not here to threaten you, and no, I'm not part of whatever they're planning. I'm here because I'm done watching her get away with this." Jake nodded slowly. "Bethany?" Tom exhaled miserably. "Bethany, Marcus, the whole damn inner circle. They turned Timber Ridge into their personal cash register. And your uncle's land." He rubbed his forehead. "That was their gold mine." Tom gestured to the sedan. "Get in. We shouldn't be seen standing out here." Inside the car, he pulled out a USB drive and a worn manila folder, bulging with printed emails, meeting minutes, and financial records. "I kept backups," Tom said. "Everything from 2015 to 2017. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't realize how far it went. Not until construction started. Not until they shifted the boundary on purpose." Jake felt his pulse tighten. "You're saying they knew the land wasn't theirs?" "Knew?" Tom let out a hollow laugh. "They planned it, step by step." He opened the folder and slid a printed email to Jake. From Bethany Crowell to Marcus Hale, subject, timeline. "Harold is old, sick, no heirs that anyone knows about. If we secure the lakeshore now, we'll have 10 years of use before anyone challenges it. And by then, precedent will favor us. Build first, explain later." Jake read the words twice. They hit hard, not because he was surprised, but because they finally confirmed exactly what he'd suspected since Thanksgiving. Tom kept going. "That survey in 2016? Gary Whitmore, Bethany's ex-husband, created it for $8,000. She told the board it was cheaper than hiring an independent firm. What she didn't say was that it let them control the outcome." He handed over more documents, internal messages, budget allocations, payments approved long before any permit was filed. Jake scanned each page, anger tightening with every line. "This," Tom said, tapping the folder, "is intent, fraud, deliberate boundary manipulation. Everything Sarah needs to dismantle their entire defense." Jake met his eyes. "Why now? Why come forward after all these years?" Tom looked down at his hands. "Because Harold didn't deserve what they did to him. And because I watched Bethany ruin lives. Residents who questioned her. Neighbors who resisted the dues increases. Timber Ridge became a dictatorship with a friendly smile plastered on top." He swallowed hard. "I should have spoken up years ago. You're my last chance to fix any part of it." Jake placed a hand on the folder. "This helps more than you know." Tom nodded, but tension remained in his shoulders. "There's one more thing." He reached into the console and pulled out a second USB drive. This one was unlabeled, scratched, almost like someone had tried to hide it. "This," he whispered, "is from a meeting in 2016. A closed-door session the board held at Bethany's house. I didn't know someone recorded it until 2 days ago. A friend, someone who wants to stay anonymous, slipped it to me." Jake waited. "On that recording," Tom said slowly, "Bethany explains why they didn't notify Harold about the construction. She says he's too sick to fight, that he'll probably pass before anything becomes an issue. Marcus agrees, calls it a strategic advantage." Tom looked Jake dead in the eyes. "That audio will break them in court." Jake's chest tightened, not from fear, but from the sudden realization that the fight had just shifted. This wasn't about evidence anymore. It wasn't even about land. This was malice. Documented. Recorded. "Why give this to me?" Jake asked. Tom's voice cracked. "Because the board meeting they held last weekend? The one Bethany called? They were planning something, and it wasn't just about you filing paperwork. Jake leaned forward. What kind of something? Tom hesitated, then spoke in a low, grave tone. They want to file an injunction to freeze your inheritance. Claim your uncle was mentally unfit. If they get a judge to entertain that idea, you'll spend the next year proving your uncle wasn't crazy. And they'll keep squatting on your land the whole time. Jake felt the temperature in the car drop. They're trying to erase Harold, he said quietly. Tom nodded. And if you don't fight back now, publicly, legally, decisively, they might succeed. Jake closed the folder. How do we protect you? Tom shook his head. Don't. If they find out I talked, they'll smear me same as they're smearing you. But I'm old enough to stop caring who hates me. He opened the door. Just promise you'll take them down. Jake stepped out as well. I will. Tom paused before getting back into his car. One more thing, Jake. His voice dropped. Bethany thinks she's untouchable because she believes people will always defend the community rather than the truth. Prove her wrong. He drove off, leaving Jake in the empty lot, the USB drive warm in his hand. When Jake returned to the apartment, Sarah was waiting. He handed her the folder and the drive wordlessly. She skimmed the first page of the printed emails. Her jaw clenched. This is intentional fraud. Coordinated. Documented. Jake nodded. There's a recording too. From 2010. Sarah's eyes widened. If that audio is what Tom says it is, Jake, this case just shifted from civil dispute to criminal exposure. Jake looked at the evidence spread across the table. They built a pavilion on stolen land, he said. Now we build a case on their own words. As Sarah loaded the files onto her laptop, she murmured, almost to herself, this is going to blow Timber Ridge apart. Jake stood at the window, watching Main Street flicker under the streetlights. For the first time since stepping through that iron gate on Thanksgiving, he felt something sharp and solid in his chest. Not anger, not fear, advantage. He turned back to Sarah. Tomorrow, he said, we go to court. But Sarah shook her head. No, she replied. Tomorrow, we let this simmer. When the time comes, I want Bethany to walk into the courtroom thinking she's already won. Jake smiled, a small, grim thing. Then we give her the shock she deserves. Outside, the quiet Montana night held its breath. Inside, the walls of Timber Ridge HOA had just started to crack, and soon they would collapse. Sarah moved with practiced calm the morning of the first hearing, but Jake could see the fire beneath her composure. She had organized every document, every timeline, every fragment of evidence they'd collected into a single, lethal brief. The courthouse in Billings wasn't grand, just a square building with cold hallways and older paint. But the moment they stepped inside, the air tightened with tension. Bethany was already there. She stood near the courtroom doors wearing a tailored navy suit, hair perfect, smile polished. But behind that smile was strain, tight around the eyes, taut at the jawline. She didn't approach Jake. She didn't greet Sarah. She spoke only to her attorney, Bradley Saunders, a sleek corporate type with a binder so thin Jake wondered whether he'd brought anything substantial at all. He soon realized Saunders didn't need a binder. He had confidence, the smug kind that assumed money and status would always win. The clerk called the case, and they entered. Judge Harris presided, a middle-aged woman with the sharp, attentive gaze of someone who didn't tolerate theatrics. She reviewed the initial filings silently before lifting her eyes to the courtroom. Mr. Carter, Ms. Whitmore, she began. This dispute concerns property boundaries, allegations of fraudulent surveys, and unauthorized construction. We'll begin with opening statements. Sarah rose smoothly. Your Honor, we will show that the Timber Ridge HOA knowingly constructed multiple facilities, pavilion, dock, parking lot, courts, on land that Mr. Carter's family has legally owned since 1983. We will present boundary surveys, tax records, recorded communications, and expert testimony demonstrating deliberate fraud, not error. We will show that Mr. Carter's late uncle objected before losing his health, and that the HOA manipulated boundary records to absorb 1,200 feet of private land without proper authorization. A few residents in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Bethany's lawyer rose next. Your Honor, Timber Ridge acted in good faith. The community relied on a legally filed 2016 survey amendment. Any dispute arises from unclear historical markers and a boundary description nearly 40 years old. Mr. Carter seeks to dismantle a thriving community facility, built and enjoyed by hundreds for years. His accusations are unsubstantiated and inflammatory. Judge Harris made no reaction, simply nodding. Proceed. Sarah called the first witness. Remy Hale walked to the stand, with the posture of a man who'd rather be in the woods than in a courtroom, but whose words would cut cleaner than any chainsaw. After being sworn in, Sarah began her direct examination. Mr. Hale, describe your qualifications. 28 years as a licensed land surveyor. Boundary disputes, easements, legal surveys across Montana. And did you conduct an independent survey of the Carter property? I did. What did you find? Remy unfolded a map on the screen. The original markers matched the 1983 deed exactly. The HOA's 2016 survey shifted the eastern boundary west by approximately 1,200 feet. Not a mistake. A pattern. Sarah leaned in. How can you be sure? Markers were physically removed. One was yanked out and thrown aside. Boundary relocation of that precision doesn't happen accidentally. Bethany stiffened. Saunders wasted no time in cross-examination. Mr. Hale, markers decay. Weather moves them. Are you saying none of that could apply here? Remy fixed him with a blunt stare. Weather doesn't uproot steel markers stamped into bedrock, and it sure doesn't replant them exactly where a developer benefits most. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Next, Sarah called Dr. Patricia Wells, the forensic document analyst. She displayed side-by-side comparisons of Harold's known signatures and the HOA's 2016 document. Your expert opinion? Sarah asked. With over 97% certainty, the signature on the 2016 survey is not authentic handwriting. It shows signs of tracing. Could Harold have signed it under duress or in impaired health? No. Even impaired signatures maintain individualized slant and pressure patterns. This does not. Saunders objected, calling the analysis speculative, but Judge Harris overruled him. Sarah then called Jake. Mr. Carter, when did you first learn your family's property was altered? Thanksgiving. I found an HOA gate across my uncle's road, and hundreds of residents celebrating on our lakefront. I had the original deed from my uncle's attorney, but they told me I was trespassing. Sarah showed the email from Bethany containing the $3,800 fine. Is this the HOA attempting to penalize you? Yes, despite me not being a member. Did they threaten legal consequences if you continued investigating? Yes. On cross, Saunders attempted to paint Jake as combative and opportunistic. Isn't it true you refused multiple offers to meet with the board? I refused to negotiate land theft. And isn't it true you confronted staff? No, I asked questions. They called police. Saunders pressed. Mr. Carter, do you want this land because it appreciated in value over the last decade? Jake didn't blink. No, I want it because it's mine. The gallery shifted again. Finally, Sarah called Tom Bennett. A hush fell as the former treasurer walked to the stand. Faces from Timber Ridge appeared in shock. Bethany's eyes widened. Real fear this time. Tom's voice trembled only at first. I served on the HOA board from 2015 to 2017. What happened wasn't a mistake. It was planned. He described the internal emails, the board's deliberate refusal to notify Harold, the decision to commission a manipulated survey. He read Bethany's emails aloud, each one a nail in the coffin. Saunders objected frequently, but Judge Harris admitted the majority of documents into evidence. Then came the turning point. Mr. Bennett, Sarah said, is there any recording of a board conversation relevant to this case? Tom nodded. Yes. Jake watched Bethany pale. Sarah pressed play. The audio was grainy but clear enough. Bethany's voice unmistakable, dripping arrogance. He's old, sick, no heirs. If we secure the lakeshore now, he won't live long enough to stop us. And when he's gone, no one will challenge 10 years of established community use. Gasps erupted. A few HOA residents looked physically ill. Bethany shot to her feet. "This is taken out of context." Judge Harris raised her hand sharply. "Sit down, Ms. Crowell." Bethany's face flushed crimson, humiliation and fury clashing as she sank back into her seat. Sarah ended with a simple line. "Your Honor, Timber Ridge did not act in good faith. They acted with strategy, with deception, and with full knowledge the land was not theirs." As the courtroom adjourned for the day, Jake stepped into the hallway just as Bethany turned on him. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "You think you destroyed me?" Jake met her glare calmly. "I didn't destroy you. Your own words did." Her composure slipped, just for a heartbeat, and she stormed away. Sarah joined him. "Tomorrow," she said, "the judge rules." Jake exhaled slowly. "Feels like the land already gave its testimony." Sarah nodded. "Tomorrow, the law will echo it." And for the first time since Thanksgiving, Jake walked out of a building feeling the momentum had shifted entirely. The truth wasn't just on his side anymore. It was undeniable. When court reconvened the next morning, the air felt different, charged, alert, like everyone inside understood they were about to witness the end of something big. Timber Ridge residents filled the rows again. But this time their expressions had changed. Doubt lingered in their eyes. Distrust, fear. The kind a community feels when it realizes its leaders might have built everything on stolen ground. Bethany entered last. Gone was the polished smile. Gone was the breezy confidence. She looked brittle now, like a single wrong word might shatter her. Marcus Hale, the developer, sat behind her, arms folded, jaw clenched so tight a vein pulsed along his temple. Judge Harris entered. Everyone rose. She wasted no time. "I have reviewed all filings, testimony, and evidence presented. This ruling will address each claim in order." Jake braced himself. Sarah remained perfectly still. Bethany gripped the table so hard her knuckles went white. "First," Judge Harris continued, "the matter of boundary manipulation." She lifted Remy's certified survey. "The evidence shows that the original 1983 markers align with the Carter deed. The 2016 Timber Ridge survey contradicts all historical records and is unsupported by county filings or tax assessments. I find the 2016 survey invalid." A tremor of whispers rippled through the gallery. "Second," the judge said, "the question of whether Timber Ridge HOA knowingly constructed facilities on land it did not own." She displayed the drone footage: pavilion, docks, courts, parking lot, bright and damning. "These structures sit entirely on Carter property." Marcus rubbed his forehead, already defeated. "Third," Judge Harris said, lifting Dr. Wells' report, "the authenticity of the purported signature attributed to Harold Carter." Her tone sharpened. "The forensic analysis indicates, with overwhelming probability, that the signature was forged." Gasps filled the room. Even the court reporter paused her typing for half a beat. Bethany closed her eyes, throat tightening. Judge Harris continued, voice cold as stone. "The audio recording provided, verified as authentic, demonstrates intent. Timber Ridge's leadership knowingly withheld notifications from the rightful owner while deliberately exploiting his declining health." Then came the final blow. "This court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Jake Carter, on all counts." The room went silent. Jake didn't move. He had expected a fight, a struggle, maybe even a partial win. But this... Judge Harris wasn't done. "As a remedy," she said, "the following orders are issued. All Timber Ridge structures unlawfully built on Carter land shall be demolished within 90 days. Damages totaling $1.3 million are awarded to the plaintiff for lost use, environmental impact, and unjust enrichment. An additional $560,000 in punitive damages is imposed for fraudulent conduct. All HOA attempts to enforce fines, liens, or disciplinary action against Mr. Carter are void. This matter is referred to the county attorney for investigation of criminal forgery under Montana Code 45-6325. Bethany shot to her feet. "This is outrageous," she shouted, voice breaking. "You don't understand. This will destroy our community." Judge Harris struck the gavel. "Sit down, Ms. Crowell." But Bethany couldn't stop herself. Years of manipulation, unchecked power, and entitlement erupted all at once. He's lying. All of them. That land was nothing before we built on it. We made it valuable. He's stealing from us. Sheriff Morales, stationed at the wall, stepped forward, hand raised in warning. Jake turned to face her fully. Calm. Quiet. Controlled. You took what wasn't yours, he said. Now the land goes back to its owner. Bethany froze, staring at him, fury trembling through her, but she said nothing else. Marcus stood abruptly, muttering to his lawyer. He exited the courtroom without looking back. The gallery felt stunned, almost reverent, not because they agreed with Jake, but because they finally understood the scale of what their board had done. Their fees had funded the construction. Their trust had enabled the fraud. Their property values were now tied to a scandal that would shake Timber Ridge for years. As the judge adjourned, residents avoided Bethany entirely. Some whispered, some glared. A few looked at Jake with hesitant, almost apologetic expressions. Sarah placed a hand briefly on Jake's shoulder. It's done. You won. But Jake didn't feel triumph. Not yet. Just a release, long and slow, like pressure bleeding from an old steel pipe about to burst. Outside the courthouse, Sheriff Morales approached. You handled this right, he said. Most folks would have tried to fight fire with fire. You fought with paper. That's rarer than people think. Jake nodded. Paper built the lie. Paper ended it. Bethany won't accept this quietly, the sheriff warned. But she doesn't get a choice anymore. Sarah stepped beside them. You ready for phase 2? Jake frowned. There's another phase? She smiled thinly. Demolition oversight, environmental restoration, settlement enforcement, return of access rights, and making sure neither Bethany nor Marcus tries anything desperate while the HOA collapses around them. Jake exhaled. So the work isn't done. No, Sarah said. But the war is won. Now comes cleanup. As they walked toward Jake's truck, something caught his attention across the street. Someone leaning against a car. Nancy Whitmore, Bethany's daughter. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just held his gaze for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement that everything she'd feared about her mother had come true, and that everything Jake had fought for had been justified. Then she climbed into her car and disappeared down the road. Sarah glanced at Jake. You okay? Jake nodded again, this time more firmly. Yeah, he said. For the first time since Thanksgiving. Yeah. The judge's ruling echoed in his mind. All structures demolished within 90 days. Full damages awarded. Criminal investigation pending. Timber Ridge had been built on stolen land. And today, in that courtroom, the land finally spoke for itself. The canyon, the lake, the ridge, they were Carter land again. And justice had arrived. But justice wasn't just a ruling on paper. It had to be carried out, inch by inch, bolt by bolt, until every trace of Timber Ridge's trespass was gone for good. By early June, the first demolition crews, hired through court order, not the HOA, rolled onto the property under county supervision. Jake stood by the shoreline, as the pavilion, once filled with holiday laughter and false entitlement, was stripped apart in long, echoing groans of metal and timber. Workers hauled away beams the HOA had proudly installed as community improvements. Now those same beams sat in sad piles along the dirt road, awaiting disposal. Sarah arrived mid-morning with a thick binder under her arm. Judge Harris wants weekly documentation, she said. Photos, progress logs, inspection forms. She's not giving Timber Ridge a single inch to stall. Jake nodded. Good. They stole 7 years from my uncle. They're not stealing another minute from me. A crash sounded from the pavilion as a support column came down. The dock crew began sawing through the floating walkways next, the structure shuddering as if reluctant to surrender the water it had claimed. Look at that, Sarah murmured. Residents from Timber Ridge had gathered at the property line, quiet, tense, standing behind the bright orange temporary fence the sheriff required. Some held phones, recording the demolition. Others simply stared with hollow expressions, the kind worn by people realizing their world was built on a lie they never questioned. One man stepped forward, middle-aged, neat polo, HOA badge removed. "Mr. Carter," he called out, "for what it's worth, some of us didn't know." Jake studied him for a long moment. "You should have asked." The man lowered his eyes and stepped back. By afternoon, the parking lot, once the HOA's pride, was a jagged scar of broken asphalt. County environmental specialists hovered over soil samples, frowning. "Contamination," one muttered. "They dug without permits. This runoff shouldn't have gone into the lake." Jake clenched his jaw. "So now we fix that too." And they did. Slowly. Thoroughly. Over weeks, the county ordered restoration crews to haul out the contaminated layers, replacing them with clean sand and native soil. The lake, once strangled by concrete and noise, began to breathe again. Ripples moved freely across its surface, glinting like hammered silver in the afternoon light. Sheriff Morales visited often, checking on compliance. He stood beside Jake one afternoon as workers lifted the final chunk of illegal dock from the water. "Funny thing," the sheriff said. "Bethany tried filing a temporary injunction yesterday. Claimed demolition was a threat to community heritage. Judge denied it before lunch." Jake exhaled sharply. "She'll never admit she lost." "No," Morales agreed. "But losing isn't a choice anymore." Across the field, a moving truck rumbled past, another Timber Ridge resident leaving for good. The fallout was spreading. Property values had dipped. HOA dues were frozen. Social media turned ugly. Rumors of dissolving the entire association grew louder each day. On the last day of demolition, only one structure remained: the lakeside pergola where the Thanksgiving feast had taken place. The place Jake first confronted the security guards who told him he didn't belong on his own land. The crew foreman approached Jake. "We can take it down now." Jake hesitated. Something in the air felt symbolic, final. "Leave it to me," he said. He stepped onto the pergola. The wood creaked under his boots. He traced a hand across one of the beams, remembering how Bethany had stood here, wineglass in hand, lecturing him about community guidelines as if she owned the earth beneath them. Then he reached down, gripped the first of the 4 anchor bolts, and turned it loose. It took strength, more than he expected, but it came free with a long metallic groan. Bolt 2, bolt 3, bolt 4. With the last bolt removed, he stepped back. The pergola tilted, wavered, then sank into itself, collapsing in a tired heap of borrowed lumber and stolen ground. Jake breathed out slowly. It was over. Later that evening, as the sun slid low across the ridge, Jake walked to the original boundary marker, the steel post his uncle had planted decades ago. Grass had grown tall around it. The engraving, weathered but legible, read, "Carter Land, 1983. Jake cleaned the dirt from its base and set it upright with new concrete, reinforcing the legacy his uncle had fought to keep, even as his strength faded. "You were right," Jake whispered. "They moved the fences, but they didn't take the land." Footsteps approached behind him. Sheriff Morales. "You know," the sheriff said, "not many folks would have seen this through. Most would have taken a settlement, maybe let the HOA keep a corner of the lake." Jake shook his head. "This land carried my family through generations. I wasn't about to let someone's fake paperwork rewrite that." The sheriff gave a small nod of respect. "Well, you did it the right way." As Morales left, Jake looked across the restored shoreline. The water lay calm, reflecting the sky with a kind of quiet pride. Birds stirred along the cattails. A breeze moved through the fresh soil where asphalt once suffocated the earth. The lake remembered its owner. And Jake, for the first time in months, felt the weight finally lift. He walked to the water's edge, crouched, and dipped his hand into the cool surface. Ripples spread outward, gentle, steady, free. Justice hadn't just restored the land. It had restored its voice. Jake rose, took one last look at the boundary post standing firm in the fading light, and smiled. The fight was over. But the legacy, his uncle's legacy, was just beginning again. If you've ever had to stand your ground for what's yours, drop a simple "justice" in the comments so I know you're out there. And if stories like this speak to you, go on and hit subscribe. There are plenty more battles of grit, land, and hard-earned dignity still to come.